All right, let's talk about something pretty wild. It's one of the most extreme things a government can do to its economy. We're talking about demonetization. Think of it like hitting a giant, scary reset button on all the cash in an entire country.
No, really, just think about that for a second. What if all the cash you have in your wallet right now suddenly became worthless? Like overnight. The money you were going to use for groceries, for gas, it's just paper. That is the kind of shockwave we're diving into today.
Okay, so let's break it down. What does this term demonetization actually mean? What are we even talking about here?
The definition is actually pretty straightforward, but the impact is just massive. It's when a government basically says, you see this bill, as of right now, it's no longer legal money. Just like that. It ceases to be valid for any transaction. Its value is just gone. So the big question is, why on earth would a country do this to itself? I mean, it sounds completely chaotic, and spoiler alert, it is. But the reasons for taking such a drastic step can be just as huge as the fallout.
Yeah, this isn't a decision made on a whim. The goals are always really, really big. For instance, maybe you're trying to stabilize the currency's value or fight insane runaway inflation. A huge reason is to combat financial crime. We're talking tax evasion, counterfeit money, you name it. Or sometimes it's a forceful way to modernize a very cash-heavy economy. And in some cases, it's just about getting on the same page with other countries to form a currency union.
And look, this isn't some new, crazy idea. It's happened a bunch of times throughout history. Way back in 1873, the US did it with silver to switch over to the gold standard. A bit more recently, you probably remember when a whole bunch of European countries ditched their old currencies, the franc, the mark, the lira, to adopt the euro in 2002. That was a huge coordinated demonetization. And then you have the really extreme cases, like Zimbabwe in 2015. They had to scrap their dollar because hyperinflation hit, get this, 89.76 trillion%. I mean, you can't even wrap your head around a number that big.
But probably the most famous and controversial modern example of this kind of shock therapy happened just a few years ago. We have to talk about India's massive undertaking in 2016. To understand the scale of what happened here, you really only need to know one number: 86%. That's it. With a single announcement, 86% of all the cash circulating in the world's second most populous country became invalid.
So picture this. One evening, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gets on TV and just announces that the two biggest bills, the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes, which were basically the lifeblood of the cash economy, were worthless. And not next week or tomorrow, effective immediately. The shock across the nation was just immense.
And what happened next was, well, pretty much total chaos. For a country where something like 78% of all transactions were cash, this was a body blow. You had these enormous snaking lines outside banks and ATMs that went on for days. Small businesses were crippled by severe cash shortages. And here's a crazy detail. Because the new notes were a different size, all 200,000 ATMs across the country had to be recalibrated by hand. It was an absolute logistical nightmare.
So what was the government hoping to achieve with all this disruption? Well, the stated goals were super ambitious. They wanted to completely eradicate counterfeit currency, tackle widespread tax evasion, get this, only about 1% of the population was paying income tax, and, of course, eliminate all this hidden black money from illegal activities. And a big part of it was to force the country to leapfrog into a cashless digital economy. Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? With any demonetization, it all comes down to the trade-off. Was all that chaos, all that pain for everyday people, was it actually worth it in the end?
And this is where it gets really complicated. If you look at the pros column, yeah, India saw a bump in the number of people paying taxes, and digital payments absolutely exploded. But the cons column is pretty heavy. The burden on regular citizens, especially the poor, was just immense. The economy stalled out in the short term. And maybe the most surprising thing? It turns out that 99.3% of all the old cash was returned to the banks. That kind of suggests that not much of that black money they were targeting was actually destroyed. Okay, to really get a gut feeling for this idea of a powerful entity just wiping out value, let's bring it a little closer to home with an analogy you might know all too well. Think about social media creators. For them, their channel or their account is a real asset. It makes them money.
But then the platform, a central authority, can just change its rules. And suddenly, poof, your content is demonetized. That asset, which used to have real value, doesn't anymore. It's really the same core principle, just on a much, much smaller scale. All right, so let's wrap this up. What's the final tally? When you look at this economic nuclear option, what's the verdict?
I think this quote from Investopedia really hits the nail on the head. It calls demonetization a powerful yet potentially disruptive economic tool. And that's the whole story right there. It has the power to fundamentally change an economy for the better, but it's also incredibly disruptive. The potential upside is huge, but so is the potential for absolute chaos.
And that really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? In a world that's sprinting towards digital currency, crypto, and digital wallets, you have to wonder, is this whole idea of demonetizing physical cash becoming a relic of the past? Or are we just getting ready for a whole new kind of reset button?